Special meeting of the Metropolitan Council. Today is Wednesday, July 18th, 2018, and I call the meeting to order. The first order of business is the approval of the agenda. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion is adopted. The next order of business is the approval of the minutes from our July 11th meeting. Could I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion is adopted. At this point in the meeting, members of the public who wish to address the council on matters typically not on the agenda, but I do understand that there's someone who wishes to speak on an item that is on the agenda, may do so, but I would ask you to just limit your comments to 3 minutes. Looking at the list, I see Mary Paddock is here to speak. Welcome, Mary. Please introduce yourself to the council.
Is this fine?
Turn the, there you go.
Is this right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Mary Paddock. I live in Minneapolis, and I'm here representing two large citizen groups, LRT Done Right and the Lakes and Parks Alliance. I'm sure we are all tired of Southwest LRT, including all of you. Have you stopped to think why it's so problematical? It's the wrong route. With another route, you'd have none of these problems. Fights with the city of Minneapolis, fights with the park board, lawsuits, the wall, railroad disputes, costly delays. And the problems are not over. Perhaps you are aware of new difficulties with the Calhoun Isles Condo Association, or maybe your staff is saving that information until after this meeting. Southwest was supposedly cost effective. No, it's more costly because of the tunnel, lawsuits, delays, and liability. Meanwhile, the West End and Uptown clearly offer superior ridership and are safe. Today's agenda focuses on liability and safety, as the railroads, for the third time, insist that the project is so dangerous that they refuse to be liable. The first time was at the legislature, the second time was regarding the wall. The railroads know a dangerous project when they see one. So do we residents. Why do you protect them and not us? Some people dismiss what we have to say, calling us NIMBYs. What's a NIMBY? Here's how to find out. Ask TC&W to park a tanker of explosive ethanol on the street in front of your home. The home where you, your spouse, your children, your mom and dad live. Then invite Mr. Alexander or Mr. Furman or Mr. McLaughlin to stand there for a few hours a day lighting matches, like sparking trains next to ethanol freight. You hope they don't drop the match on dry grass, that the tank doesn't leak, that neither man nor tank is hit by a passing car. You'll have turned into a NIMBY. When will you declare Southwest LRT wrong and dangerous and either fix it or stop it altogether? It is unconscionable to spend millions of dollars to protect the railroad corporations with endless resources from financial harm and do nothing to protect us, the people you are supposed to be representing. Not just homes or railroads, but lives are at stake. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that wish to address the council? Seeing none, we'll move on to our business item. The 2018-196 settlement agreement with TC&WR. I'm going to have Jim Alexander provide an overview of this item.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Jim Alexander, Project Director for the Southwest LRT. I have a short presentation to go through first. So today's topics are freight rail background and previous actions related to TC&W and specifically to the Bass Lake Spur and the Kenilworth Corridor we've been talking about in the past. And then the action that being under consideration tonight is the settlement agreement with Twin Cities and Western Railroad, and have a slide about next steps. So to give you all some background, you may recall earlier this spring, we to get a council action to authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute several agreements related to the freight rail and Bass Lake Spur and the Kenilworth Corridor. The first being the real estate purchase and sale agreement with Canadian Pacific, who currently owns the Bass Lake Spur corridor. The second, property transfer agreement with Hennepin County Regional Rail Authority, HICRA, for the Kenilworth Corridor, and any documents or that would be associated with those closings of those two properties. And also any settlement. You may recall that we did put together a proposed settlement to TCNW at this time back in March, and so that was what that piece was. And then finally, a joint powers agreement with HICRA. And I have a slide to talk about that in a moment as far as that relationship. The other piece back in March was to authorize the petitioning of Surface Transportation Board to essentially realize these transactions. So STB needs to weigh in anytime there's a property transfer, or we're looking at another piece is to change the common carrier role in one of the corridors in the Bass Lake Spur, and I'll talk about that in a moment here. So the current freight rail ownership and carriers and operators, I've shown this slide in the past, talks about the Bass Lake Spur owner, Canadian Pacific, common carrier, and that's the obligation to serve any shippers along that specific route segment. And that's Canadian Pacific today, and the rail operator is TCNW. In the Kenilworth Corridor, the property owner is HICRA, Hennepin County Regional Rail Authority. They also have that common carrier obligation, and the rail operator is TCNW and CP. And then further out west is what's called the Glencoe Junction, further to the lower left on the page here on the screen. Property ownership, TCNW, and they have the common carrier and the rail operating obligations. So what's being proposed, and this is probably a familiar slide to you all as well. What's being proposed in the Bass Lake Spur is that the ownership go from Canadian Pacific to the Met Council, and the HICRA, Hennepin County Regional Rail Authority, take on the common carrier. TCNW would remain the rail operator along that segment, and the Kenilworth Corridor, again, Met Council ownership, HICRA, common carrier, and continue with the rail operator, TCNW and CP. You see a little inset off to the right, bottom right, the southerly connector that's being proposed as we would sever the current connection in St. Louis Park, and so the ownership would be Met Council and HICRA as the common carrier and rail operator TCNW. Glencoe Junction does not change. So in terms of the agreements, and this is similar to what we had laid out in March, and we sent this off to the STB in early April, is that joint powers agreement, the relationship between the council and HICRA to essentially manage the maintenance and dispatching requirements in the Bass Lake Spur, and manage the relationship in the Kenilworth Corridor. And then there's also the existing trackage rights agreement. So there's a trackage right agreement in the Bass Lake Spur, and there's a separate one for the Kenilworth Corridor. And so the relationship there is between HICRA and TCNW and the Bass Lake Spur, and the Kenilworth Corridor would be HICRA and TCNW and CP. That's really unchanged from what it is today. So what we'll be talking about today is one of the items is a co-location agreement that's under the settlement agreement that would link in the LRT piece of the Bass Lake Spur and Kenilworth Corridor. And I have a slide on that to talk about that a little bit. So here's the combination of those two agreements. So actions that have been taken since March, early April, April 4th and 5th, petitions were filed with STB by the council and the county. And subsequent to that, I think it was April 24th, TCNW filed opposition papers to that filing to STB. They also filed a lawsuit against the council, the county, and Canadian Pacific. And so during April through June, there was a lot of correspondence back and forth with STB, with the parties. And in June, we agreed with TCNW to enter into STB-sponsored mediation. And over the months of June and July, the council, the county, and TCNW participated in 4 mediation sessions. And we reached a resolution, which is going to be presented for your all consideration tonight. And it's also subject to county approval as well. So the proposed agreement, it's a settlement agreement. Underneath that is a construction agreement and a co-location agreement. And this would look to resolve disputes between all the parties. So in terms of the settlement agreement, TC&W would release any claims and withdraw opposition related to the STB petition and the lawsuit. And one of the requirements under this agreement is that within 24 hours, TC&W would communicate in writing to the STB and its shippers about the withdrawal of opposition to the STB petition. And then within 5 days, all the parties would jointly notify the court of the settlement and render that lawsuit null and void. I think maybe that's proper language. Maybe the legal guys might want to weigh in on that. And then minimizing financial risk. So the overall payment to TC&W would be to the amount of $18.5 million, and that's distributed over a course of 5 years. There are some initial payments, but the final payment would be related to once Southwest LRT gets into revenue service or 5 years after the full notice to proceed occurs. And the total amount of the 18.5 does fit within our budget, the $2.003 billion budget. It doesn't rely on contingency. We are looking to use base dollars to pay for the 18.5. And this does avoid long-term financial risks, as we were looking at an agreement with TC&W back in the August timeframe of last year. And after we had proceedings here in this room, TC&W was still looking for further compensation long term, and I would say that those obligations are not part of the settlement agreement. This is a kind of a payment we're done in terms of how much what kind of financial obligations we have long term. Let's see other things. So in terms of the siding track, so really what the premise of TC&W's dispute with us is they have use of siding track out there today at Bass Lake Spur, and some of that siding track is going to go away. And so they're concerned about that track being removed, and they're looking for compensation to be able to continue their freight rail operations with the loss of that track. So we have about 16,000 feet of track, and I'll have a slide to show you the distribution of that. TC&W would cease use of the siding track as it's removed from by the project from the eastern part of the project. So about 16,000 feet. It comes out in 3 phases, and TC&W has agreed under the settlement agreement to cease use of that siding track as we have a program with our civil construction contract to take that siding out. And then finally, there's siding that will be remaining in the Bass Lake Spur in the western part that TC&W has agreed to cease all storage and freight forwarding activities from remaining siding by July of 2020. And what that freight forwarding means, that's just really kind of a short-term storage operation. So TC&W essentially will no longer have storage. They will no longer perform storage in the the Bass Lake Spur as of July 1, 2020 under this agreement. And the last piece is this agreement would provide for rehabilitation of freight rail facilities in the western portion of the Bass Lake Spur. That's something the county and the council have been talking about. This would be something that we look to do outside of the project, but it has been programmed in the settlement agreement. I can take any questions if you have those as I get through here. But in terms of the settlement agreement and the siding track, this is the layout. So in blue, it's about 11,700 feet or so of siding track that would remain, and there's no new track being built here. It's just all remaining, and that would stay in place. But again, that storage operation would cease in 2020. And you can see the other color bands there where track gets removed around the Excelsior area in the pink there in 2018 as we begin construction on the project, and then another phase 2019 comes out just in the Beltline area, and then just a little bit west of that, the rest of that 16,000 feet comes out in 2020, and that corresponds with our construction specifications. I might pause there to see if there are any questions on the settlement agreement itself, because the next slides start talking about the construction and the co-location agreement.
Any questions? Member Chavez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jim, I don't know if it's precisely either one of these agreements, but at what point in the transaction or in the process does Met Council become the owner of this land?
Sure. That's a good question, Madam Chair. Councilor Chavez, that would be part of the SDB process. So once we have this agreement signed, assuming you all agree to it and the county agrees to it, that would be sent on to the SDB for their consideration. They'll have a couple of weeks to weigh in on that document, and once that happens, then we would look to have a closing of the properties. And so the CP agreement is structured that we have to close within 6 months of that closing, and Hickory would be essentially at the same time. We'd close the Bass Lake Spur, we'd close the Kenilworth corridor.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Go,
All right.
I guess seeing none, go ahead.
Okay, so onto the construction agreement. Now, the construction agreement again is kind of part of the settlement agreement. It governs the roles and responsibilities during construction of Southwest LRT, and it provides for a construction coordination committee, which consists of the council, essentially SPO, the project office, and TC&W representatives. And it allows TC&W to review, comment on contractor submittals. It really just allows TC&W to be part of the construction process, and this is something we would like to have, because we're going to be doing a lot of construction in the Bass Lake Spur and the Kenilworth corridor, and it's very advantageous to have a cooperating party at the table as we're looking to do that construction. And so we have back in the day, we had worked out a lot of detail back in 2016, a lot of detail on how TC&W would be involved in this process, and in terms of all the documents the contractor has to prepare, TC&W reviewing those as they relate to our freight rail and their operations. We do have a series of outages that were discussed back in 2016, and those are essentially put in the civil construction specifications, and so we don't really have any changes with that. And it also allows TC&W to inspect the construction work of the freight rail facilities. Maybe I'll pause there real quick if there are any questions on the construction agreement.
Seeing none, go ahead.
Right. So the next piece is the co-location agreement. This provides for another coordinating committee. This will be long-term now. So the council, will have our operations folks, will have for the county, and TC&W be part of that committee. And that will be talking about things like what kind of maintenance might be required in the upcoming year. So to make sure we're on the same page as far as what requirements are, operating, if there's anything that needs to be adjusted. This defines the roles and responsibilities, and I want to stress that it's really all in accordance of the existing package rights agreements. So those stay in place as far as what we've had with, or what CP has had with TC&W and what HICRA has had with TC&W. Those will be remain in place. This co-location, again, is kind of an LRT linked into the TRAs, if you will. So acting on HICRA's behalf, council will assume maintenance and liability responsibilities as owners of the corridors, and that include performance of maintenance obligations, and those obligations will be paid for with the access fees that TC&W currently pays to CP for the Bass Lake Spur, and to the county, the Kenilworth corridor. That would be coming into the council to help pay for maintenance and replacement responsibilities. And this is consistent with state law passed during 2017 special session. The council, through its insurance program that we'll have for BNSF as well, will provide coverage for claims arising from LRT-related incidences. So if there's a freight-only incident, TC&W will still have to carry insurance for that. So that's part of the package right agreement. That doesn't change.
Can we just pause there for one quick second? I think it's important to note here that in terms of this kind of deal being structured overall, that the council will be taking on ownership, and Jim explained this earlier, ownership of the CP corridor and the Kenilworth corridor, so that land that's currently owned and maintained by a private entity will become owned and maintained by the council. So that will become something that we would be responsible for the maintenance and ultimately access to the corridor through flagging and dispatch. And that gives us a lot more ability to kind of control the quality of the infrastructure, but also control kind of how many trains and timing of access to the corridor.
All right, maybe I'll pause there if there are any questions on co-location agreement.
Seeing none, go ahead.
All right, so tonight's action recommendation is to authorize the regional administrator to first execute the settlement agreement with Twin Cities and Western for the Southwest LRT project in an amount of $18.5 million. Second, to execute the associated co-location agreement and construction agreement. And finally, any ancillary agreements or documents necessary to implement the settlement agreements.
Great. So that's the motion before us. I would entertain a motion to approve this.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Actually, so then, do you have one more
Well,
slide?
Madam Chair, I just have a next step, so take this.
Okay. I think we can take discussion. Go ahead, Member
Question,
Blander.
Chair, just on item 2, so, and I may have asked you this before, so on the construction agreement, what was that, is that gonna be our responsibility, or is this jointly administered or managed?
Sure, Madam Chair, Councilmember Lander, I should clarify that first off, there's no monies involved in the co-location or the construction agreements, first of all, but this co-location agreement would be between the council and TCNW. As we have the TRAs in place, we'll also have the co-location agreement to address the LRT portion of these corridors. Does that help?
So,
in that
so
matter?
let me rephrase it then. So when construction or reconfiguration or rebuilding this, a spur, a line or whatever, is that our responsibility under our standards and expectations, or TCWR?
Yes, Madam Chair, Councilmember Lander. The construction agreement would be, so construction of those freight rail assets that is part of the SOWLRT project. So it's our responsibility to get those implemented. With the closings, we will own that property, and as part of the project, we'll be rebuilding a lot of that freight infrastructure. And so that's our responsibility. And I would say that as the sequencing of things go, the settlement agreement, all these agreements would get signed, presuming we have agreement from you all tonight and the county. But the construction agreement essentially goes into play once we start construction. And then once construction is done, that construction agreement is done as well. And then we move into the co-location agreement where there's cohabitation of LRT and freight. So did I answer your question?
No, but I'll ask it again.
So can I try? Can I try?
Yes, maybe.
So, Mr. Member Melander, I think construction agreement kind of governs the relationship.
I
between the
understand
council.
that. That's
Okay.
not my question.
Okay, go ahead.
My question is it going to be, comply with the expectations and the standards that we have with all of our other projects? Because rail construction, at least that type of rail construction, not like we have is different than what we see out of the street. And there's only a few people that do it. I'm just curious.
Madam Chair, Councilmember, yes, it will.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions? Member Chavez?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The gestation for this project has been longer than an elephant's pregnancy, and we've had more hurdles on this one than I think anybody anticipated. Now we're going across the threshold of ownership. I never imagined this for the project when it began. So I just want to be clear, we all understand, we're going to be owners. I understand covering the costs, but as far as the appearance, the liability, et cetera, we have it insured, I get that. But it's still going to have the appearance of being a railroad. So I think we need to understand that going forward, the legacy that we're going to leave for the future councils. Now, if the next hurdle surfaces, God knows what that is, and this project doesn't proceed, are we going to be owners of this property going forward?
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, you want to take that one?
Sure, absolutely. So I think the way that this is kind of structured, and we didn't get into the details of the timing of the payments, but the project obviously has a series of milestones that we're looking at ahead. The next major milestone from the Federal Transit Administration's perspective is getting a letter of no prejudice, which would allow us to award the civil construction bids and begin early construction. Some of the timing of being able to have site control, because really a deal with the railroads, both CP and TCNW, is about giving us the opportunity to own the land so that we can build on it, right? So that we can adequately demonstrate site control for FTA standards. And so we would need to acquire the CP parcel prior to awarding the bids. At that point, we would have approval from the Surface Transportation Board for the transaction to continue, but then we would also have an indication from the FTA that they had approved our initial request to begin early construction. So we would have to satisfy, I think, at least 2 early milestones before signing the agreement. And that's one of the reasons why we built in 6 months between the Surface Transportation Board action and closing on the CP property. So there's space in there to make sure that we can kind of lock in some of the key milestones before we take ownership of the property.
Madam Chair, I understand those conditions. What I'm wondering about is the actual funding for the project, the rest of the funding to come through. It's one thing to have the real estate transaction close and receive the approvals we need from the feds for that. But as I understand the sequence of milestones, that still lacks the funding approval from DC. Is that correct?
The full funding grant agreement, that's correct.
Okay. I just want to be sure I understood that.
That's
Thanks.
correct. Other questions? Member Dorfman.
All right, I don't have a question. I just, and you're right, Councilmember Chavez, it's been a long project. I think the first meetings I had, I was mayor of St. Louis Park, and that was early in my career. In any case, big projects like this that have a significant and I think very positive impact on the region take a long time. And as you work through it in order to get the best possible project, there are fits and starts, and that certainly has happened with Southwest LRT. There have been a number of significant milestones along the way where we've moved progress forward. This is certainly a very significant milestone that is facing us in this decision today. And I just want to, there are a lot of people who have worked to get us to this point, a lot of people in the community, both residents and businesses and elected officials and others. But I just want to sort of shout out and say thank you to the Board of Directors and Mark Wegner of Twin City and Western, to the Hennepin County Regional Rail Authority, and our chair and Katie and staff who sat down and worked through this agreement, which, if approved today and approved by the Hennepin County Regional Rail Authority, does the board, Hennepin County Board, approve it too, or just?
That is correct.
In any case, if all of those approvals fall in place, I think we're at a good point to move this project forward and begin to see construction and implementation of it in the region. So I just want to thank lots of people who have done lots of work over decades, frankly, to get us to this point. So thank you.
Any other comments or questions? None? Sorry, I was seeing nodding, but maybe not. So, I mean, I think I would also echo the thanks, especially to TCNW for agreeing to let us share this information publicly, because I think that there had been some, questions about really what was in this agreement, especially compared to the agreement that we had last August. And so I do appreciate that, and appreciate their willingness to really sit with us and try to work through some of these, not only during construction, but also longer term components of this agreement. And I do feel pretty comfortable that we were able to meet the needs of our kind of public ownership, public interest, but as well as understand and try to meet some of the concerns of the shippers in Western Minnesota, as well as Twin Cities and Western and Hennepin County, as well as just the residents of the region. So with that, if there's no additional discussion, we have a motion and a second, then I would say all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion is adopted. The next item are just reports from council members. Do council members have any
We have
reports?
some next steps.
Oh, I'm
Sure,
sorry.
good.
I'm sorry.
I just have one.
Sorry.
Jim is still there.
You're still there, Jim. Go ahead.
Just wanted to talk about next steps in terms of completing the agreed to actions to find settlement agreement related to the STB and lawsuit. And then we're looking for the STB decision, as I indicated, hopefully in the next couple of weeks here. And then we will look to resubmit our application to the FDA for the letter of no prejudice for the civil construction contract. And then FDA will hopefully approve that LONP request, and we will look to then award the civil construction contract to the low bidder, and then submit the application for the full funding grant agreement to the FDA.
Great, thank you.
All right.
So now we can move on to the report section. Do council members have any reports that they would like to share? Member Rummel?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. I was invited to sit in today on the Minnesota Sustainable Growth Coalition because the person who was supposed to be there for the Met Council couldn't be there, and I was really kind of blown away. For those of you who don't recall, the circular economy, these are mostly for-profit, large leaders in the metro area. You know, 3M, General Mills, Ecolab, Target, you name it, they're there. And they're asking themselves about how we can shift from a linear way of doing things, which is to make something, use it, and then dispose of it, to a circular way of when we make things and we use the resource, how do we return that resource in better condition? And it's pretty exciting to listen to all these leaders of these major corporations talking about these issues. So I guess it's been since April, they've been working on this for 2 years, but now they're at a point where they're starting to create some agreements about what they're going to do. So the last meeting, I was not there, was about energy. And as people at the meeting said this morning, the energy is kind of the low-hanging fruit, because the corporations can see, well, you know, if I use renewable energy and stuff like that, it affects our bottom line. Getting to water, it's been more difficult for them. But to hear the conversation this morning, it was just extremely impressive. One member talked about, you know, we can't just withdraw water. We can't withdraw more water than we can replenish. That's a big concept. Our consumption, there's some consumption that you can't help, evaporation or water that gets used into the product and doesn't come back. So how do they replenish the environment with more water, whether it's supporting wetlands or things like that? They talk about tightening their circles and reusing water more than once, or reusing water only for what it's clean to. So if you have drinking water, you don't use it in your bathrooms and your laundries and your car cleaning and stuff. Don't put anything in the water that's going to be hard to take out, whether it's chemicals. So I was just, you know, I'm sitting there listening with Met Council and Environment Committee ears to these companies that are thinking about some of these they're going to be hard issues and how they're going to address them. So I just wanted to let you know that there is at least in the metro area, a really exciting movement going on that dovetails with the One Water Summit we just had. About 1/3 of the people that were there today were at that One Water Summit. So there seems to be this convergence of understanding of our responsibility. A large part of the conversation did have to do with equity and how does our water use, as well, whether it's our energy use or other things, how does that impact equity issues? So I just wanted to let you know there's lots of good conversations going on that dovetail with the work we do.
Excellent, thank you. Member Wolf?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I attended a retirement ceremony for Captain Franklin this morning from the Metro Transit Police Department. He's leaving us to become the chief of Rochester.
Nice.
So our loss, their gain.
Great, thank you. Other Member Munt?
Madam Chair, last night the Equity Advisory Committee met, and there was a very robust discussion about both our transportation policy plan and the regional parks policy plan. In particular, the discussion about the transportation policy plan, there were concerns raised about gentrification and whether we're planning light rail or bus rapid transit, how do we prevent the displacement of the people who currently live there, and how do we keep businesses viable during the course of construction? There was also discussion about the new report that says that Twin Cities transit riders have access to 18,000 jobs within a half-hour bus or train ride. And, there was discussion about on some corridors, speed is more important than the frequency of stops. And how do we find a metric to analyze whether we're moving ahead or falling behind in terms of how we're serving low wealth communities in that respect? This afternoon, Councilmember Dorfman and I attended the Places Committee. It's a group of city representatives along the Southwest Corridor who are looking at what to do with public art. As you remember, during cost cutting, we eliminated public art. Now we have hired Forecast, and we asked the 5 cities to each identify 2 stations where they'd like to focus public art. We're looking at possible corporate and philanthropic sponsors in order to add art along the line. So our next step will be for Metro Transit's art administrator, for Jack from Forecast, and for our former Mark Vanderschaff, who's now volunteering on the project, to go and scout out the sites and look at the potential.
Great. Sounds exciting. Thanks. Member Rodriguez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was able to welcome the Rail Evolution Steering Committee members. They're busy planning the upcoming conference, and got to look at their board and look at some of the potential workshops. So very exciting conference that they're putting together. And then also attend a couple subcommittee meetings for the Shared Mobility Collaborative, one of them being a public-private partnership, and just interesting discussion because some of the committee wants to be able to respond to these Uber and Bird companies that are coming in and not working with the public at all, and putting their scooters out there. And then also another group wanted to look at, is there any way for public agencies to be able to partner with some of these shared car sharing, bike sharing, et cetera. So kind of different, same topic, but going in different directions, I think.
Interesting. Member McCarthy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to add on to, I too attended the One Water Summit, and it was very interesting because yes, there was this great understanding of the importance of water and the need for the sustainability of water. And so there was many groups from government to nonprofits to, again, these very, very large companies. Like I attended a session where, Dow and DuPont were talking about their very large site in Texas. And they really want to go beyond the easy, low-picking fruit. Yeah, the low-picking fruit, and go beyond and try to do something more, although it is going to cost them a little bit more money to do so. And so it's just really, really exciting. And the difference here, too, is, last year, there was 400 people who attended the summit. This year, it more than doubled to nearly 900. And so there really is this, excitement and understanding that's happening, not only here in Minnesota. A lot of those numbers are because of the great job that, we did here in Minnesota, but also because it's expanded everywhere throughout our nation, which is really a wonderful thing.
Excellent. Any other updates? Member Cunningham.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I had the opportunity to attend a forum on the Minneapolis 2040 comprehensive plan in South Central Minneapolis with Council Vice President Jenkins, and it was standing room only. It's really great. The conversations in the Twin Cities, in particular in Minneapolis, are very robust with regards to the comprehensive plan. And specifically, people are very concerned about the density question. I think many of you read about and have concerns about. And I had the opportunity to speak with the planning director and council members. So I'm sure that discussion will continue to be robust in Minneapolis about their comprehensive plan. And my hope is that we can have a civil discussion where all points of view are heard and come up with a plan that really drives change. But I do think the Thrive 2040 actually has created a lot of discussion among citizens about what do we do fundamentally to change the conditions that we live in, and then how does the current state of our community actually need to change now? What are the infrastructure and other investments that we need to make in order to get to a better future where everyone can prosper? And I think that sits at the fundamental core of this discussion. And different people have different points of view on that subject. So I'm sure we will hear more about the Minneapolis plan in the future.
Great. Council Regional Administrator, no other updates? Okay, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved and
Second?
any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? We are adjourned.